Okay, howdy everybody, how you doing? Good. We are introducing today, this is lecture number 1. This is lecture number 1 of Ecology. So we're going to be introducing some terms from chapter 19 of your BJU biology book, although the next time this may be seen next year will be in a different edition. It might not be chapter 19, so it's 19 for you. Congratulations. Introducing ecology today. Ecology is the segment of biology which is concerned with the interaction of living things and non-living things. So the living things, biology, bios means life, right? So we're looking at biotic factors, things that are alive, and abiotic factors. Anytime you have a Greek word and you put a in front of it, the a negates what comes after it. So not biotic living, not living things. So ecology studies not only the geckos living in my room and how the geckos eat the bugs and all of that stuff, but it also studies how they interact with the non-living things in this room, like walls and furniture and cabinets and your feet. Well, your feet are alive, your shoes. And so anytime you study where something lives and how it interacts with other living things and things that are not alive around it, you're doing ecology. Okay? Various kinds of ecology. We need to have some terms here. Population ecology is the study of the individuals of the same species living in a particular place. So let's stick with the geckos that are living in this classroom, because I know there's at least one. There's probably more than that. If you were to study all of the geckos living in my classroom, then you would be doing population ecology. And you don't care about anything else, you just care about those geckos. And you're looking at them, how are they doing, what's their life like, how's their health, and it's all about the geckos in room 208, then you're doing population ecology. But if you wanted to study not just the geckos, but the other living things in the classroom, now you're doing community ecology. Okay? So community ecology is looking at all of the life forms in a particular area. So now you don't care about just the geckos, now you also care about the bugs that are hiding underneath and around things that the geckos eat at night when none of us are here. And you care about yourselves because you come into this environment. So how do you affect the environment? And you care about the bacteria that lives in the gut of the geckos that winds up on the floor because they poop. This is really getting beautiful. You care about everything alive in a particular area. That's community ecology. Okay? Ecosystem ecology is all the living and non-living components of an area. So now you care about the actual physical room as well. What's the average air temperature? What's the humidity? Does it ever rain in here? Hopefully not. How much sunlight does it get? Not very much, because Mr. Alley likes it dark. And all of the different aspects of the physical environment and the living things that live in that physical environment. Okay, that's ecosystem ecology. Biome ecology would be a category of environment found around the world. Now, there's no such thing as a classroom biome. I suppose there are living things in classrooms everywhere, whether or not the teachers know it. So maybe you could have a classroom biome, but we don't talk about classroom biomes. Now we should talk about the tropics. We're in Hawaii. So tropics would be a biome. Us and Fiji and Bermuda and Trinidad, Tobago, and anybody else that you can think of that lives between the tropics. We would all function with similar kinds of life patterns. Now there's different things living in different ecosystems that are all part of the same biome, but the ecosystems are all really similar in those biomes, and so you can study them all at one time. So for example, I used to live in Flagstaff, Arizona. Flagstaff, Arizona is at about 7,500 feet, depending on where in town you measure, from 7,200 to 8,000. High up. There's nothing on our island as high up as Flagstaff is. Matter of fact, there's nothing on our island half as high up or a third as high up as Flagstaff. We're way, 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 way up there. We have the highest elevation emergency room in the country. Okay, so high up there. Our environment is way different than Phoenix, even though we're in the same state. Phoenix is a desert. It's hot. Phoenix isn't hell, but you can see it from there, right? It's nasty hot and dry. And we lived in pine trees and snow, and it was great. Flagstaff had a different ecosystem than Phoenix, and you could not study the desert of Phoenix and the alpine ecosystem of Flagstaff at the same time. It's just too different. But you could study us and like someplace in Alaska at the same time, because we were very, very, very much like Alaska. Pine trees and snow and cold and all of it. So different ecosystems in different parts of the world make up the same biome. So you could be a biome ecologist and study, in the case of Flagstaff, every alpine forest. Or you could be a biome ecologist and study, like here, every tropical area, okay, lowland, tropic, coastal regions. Or you could be a biosphere ecologist. Now this is hard, because this is the whole stinking Earth. But there are ecologists that study the health and well-being of the entire planet all at one time. Very challenging to do any real science on a biosphere level, because how are you going to study the whole planet at one time? You can only be in one place at one time. You got to work with lots of people all around the world to at the same time gather data on something to do a paper about the biosphere. But it's possible, and any ecology that looks at the entire Earth at one time is biosphere ecology. So, if you like the intersection of living things and their environment, you could be an ecologist, and there's 5 different categories of ecologists here. So, there's careers here in all of these. There's degrees to be had in all of these. There's work to be done in all of these. A lot of ecology that's getting popular news attention right now is this biosphere ecology with global warming and things of that nature. But even though this is the part of ecology that's getting the most press, we still need a lot of good Christians doing other kinds of ecology, okay? So if science is interesting to you, there's jobs to be had there. Here's just a picture that presents this. So an individual is just one little elk. Well, elks aren't little, one elk. A population ecologist would look at all of the elk in an area. A community would look at the elk and the mountain lions and the bunny rabbits and the beavers and the owls and the trees and the grass and this hawk, but he's not in the picture for some reason, and so is the bear. Ecosystem ecology would look at all of the living things here and the air, the dirt, the water, what's the weather like, all that kind of stuff. Biome ecology would say, hey, look, this is an alpine community. Let's look at all the alpine communities and let's look at them together. Biosphere would say, this is the Earth. Let's study it. Okay? So there's the different levels of ecology. Here's just, I'm not going to give you a lecture on the different kinds of biomes. You do this actually in life science, I think. Did you do biomes in life science? I did. Okay, good. So this is just a review. There are different kinds of biomes out there. The polar ice caps, there are living things up there and down there, and so we should study the life there. The taiga, this is the really cold forests where it's mostly frozen but thaws a little bit in the summer. And then the savannas, grasslands with a couple of shrubs but mostly grasses. Wetlands, the riparian environments where there's marshes and lots of water. Obviously coral reefs. That's just one kind of aquatic environment. There's also freshwater biomes, and there's pelagic biomes where there's no dirt to live on. You just live in the floating water. Tropical rainforest is kind of where we find ourselves, even though we wouldn't necessarily think of ourselves as a rainforest, but this is the closest to what we live in. Deserts, Phoenix, Southern California, Mexico, Saudi Arabia. Tundra, frozen lands that don't have much trees. It's frozen shrubs and grasses. So these are all the different biomes out there. There's more too, but this just to show the diversity. This is a riparian environment, not wetlands, but around rivers and streams and things of that nature. Obviously, we have this off the coast of our coast. Coast of our coast, is that the right word? This is actually a shot of a mountain alpine forest. This is where I came from. That's my old neighbor. Just kidding. Grasslands dominated by grasses and things that eat grasses. Tiaga, frozen, mostly frozen pine forests.
Have you been there?
Deserts. I have not been to a Tiaga. I've not been. No, wait. No, I've not been to a Tiaga. Deserts, lots of deserts. This is Mexico. This is the field station that Biola owns. I'm going to put this up here. And this is where I met my wife, right here. This adobe building on the Sea of Cortez. This is the view off the beach. Gorgeous place, and we slept out on cots.
How hot is the sand?
We went in January. There's another research trip. The Biola sends two people twice a year, once in January and once in June. The June people, God bless them, they sweat their brains out. But in January, it was really nice. Like, it got up into the mid-70s. At night, it got cold. It got down to the mid-40s at night. So you see, even though we're in the desert, people have big sleeping bags. But it was beautiful in January. So, yeah, this is the carcass of a gray whale that washed up on the beach. And they buried it so that it would decompose well. And then a couple years later, they dug it up and mounted it. So that's kind of cool. The research that goes on there is ongoing research of gray whale populations in the Sea of Cortez. So if you want to go study gray whales in the Sea of Cortez and live on the beach for a couple of weeks, go to Biola. Okay, there you go. Love that place. As we're continuing to talk about ecology, there are different trophic levels. These are some other terminology things that we need to be familiar with. What eats you and what you eat determines terminology that we use to describe something. So we've already used these words, so this is review. And these words, most of them are things that you say all the time. So very little of this is new terminology to you. Perhaps you haven't used detritivore or pinnacle predator before, but most of these words will be familiar to you. If you can make your own food, you are a producer. You produce food. You produce biomolecules for others to consume. And so those are, we have called autotrophs. Trophos means to eat. Auto means yourself. So you eat yourself. You make food for yourself, which is only good if you're a plant. I don't recommend you barbecuing your thumb. Kind of weird. But these are critters that can make their own food. If you have to eat somebody else's organism, somebody else's biomolecule, you can't make your own biomolecule because you're not cool like that. You have to go eat the food that somebody else has made, then you're a consumer. Ecologically speaking, we've used the word heterotroph already. Trophos, again, to eat. Heteros, other. So you're an other eater, not a self-eater. Almost everything that you run into on a normal daily basis as a consumer, as far as animals go, animals don't make their own food. Most of the other forms of life out there don't make their own food. We all rely on algae and bacteria and plants to do that for us. So if you eat only autotrophs, you eat producers, and you eat only producers, then we call you a primary consumer. You're the first thing to eat something else. The other word for this is an herbivore. So cows and sheep, herbivores. They eat producers. They eat grasses. If you throw a steak down in front of a cow, he'll eat around it because he doesn't want the steak. He's a primary consumer. He's an herbivore. Other herbivores that you might not think of as herbivores in the ocean, there are little plankton floating around eating single-celled algae floating around, and those are also herbivores. So everything from a flea larva in the ocean to a cow is a primary consumer. Omnivores, these are called secondary consumers. They will eat producers and they will eat consumers. You are a secondary consumer. You will eat steak and salad, right? So you will have plant matter and you will have things that used to have a face. And so you are an omnivore. Other omnivores out there include bears and pigs and dogs. that will eat plant matter and animal matter. So these are all omnivores. Omni means all. Vore is the Latin word to eat. So we used Greek up here. This is Latin over here. These are plant eaters, herb, plant, vore, to eat. Omnivore, this is an all eater. I just eat. Whatever you put in front of me, I'm going to eat it. And then tertiary consumers are carnivores. These are things that don't want a salad. These are things that can't digest a salad. If you give them plant matter, their body's chemistry is not lined up to get anything out of that. You can feed a tiger all of the salad that it can eat, and it'll starve to death because his body chemistry doesn't know how to break that down. He needs something that used to have a face. Okay? And so these are tertiary consumers. They only eat other consumers. So carnivores include all of the cat family, right? Lions, leopards, and the kitty cat at home. Which is really funny when you read cat food ingredients and it starts with corn. You're like, yeah, I don't see many corn farmers keeping the cats out of the field. Like, not something that happens in nature. But anyway, tertiary consumers have to eat other animals, okay? Then there's pinnacle predators. And these are the things that eat everything else, and it is not on the menu for anything, okay? In a sense, humans are pinnacle predators, but only because we have guns, right? If you stuck a human in the middle of the rainforest and he didn't have a gun, he would not be a pinnacle predator. He'd be eaten by something, right? So God made us as the omnivore, but our technology has allowed us to climb the ladder and be a pinnacle predator. But natural pinnacle predators in the ocean, what do you think the pinnacle predator of the ocean is? Nothing eats it, it eats whatever it wants.
Whale.
Which kind?
Killer whale.
Killer whale. Good job. Nobody has guessed that off the bat. I always get like great white shark or something like that. There are videos of killer whales eating great white sharks.
Wow.
Yeah, kind of cool. It's like Clash of the Titans, but in real life. So pinnacle predators are things that eat whatever they jolly well please, and nothing eats them. So in the ocean, that's the killer whale. On our island, do you think the pinnacle predator is here? Besides us, before humans rode ashore, what do you think the pinnacle predator is here?
Sharks. On that.
On land.
Online?
What animals? What do we have? I know, it's like.
trying to think.
A
ball?
We don't have.
No, we don't have monkey. I'm going through every single
I know, it's like we didn't have. I
Wild
don't think we
pig?
had like lions.
The Hawaiian eagle. There's a
Oh.
is it an eagle or is it a hawk? Is it a what? It's
Hawk.
it's the giant hawk, right? We've got a huge hawk that lives here. That's the pinnacle predator here. Before humans rode ashore. If you go back to Flagstaff, where I used to live, we had cougars. Cougars ate whatever they wanted to, whether it was a dog, a cat, a wild pig, or your child that wandered too far from home. So there were also black bears, but black bears were not a pinnacle predator. Black bears were living here in omnivore land. Some things ate black bear cubs. Black bear adults pretty much were safe, but cougar versus black bear occasionally still would happen. So, yeah, pinnacle predators exist. The interesting thing about pinnacle predators is that if they are threatening humans, and we'll get into dominion later, and this is actually one of the things I want to talk about. Pinnacle predator threatens humans because humans moved into pinnacle predator's territory. Humans have guns. Humans shoot pinnacle predators. What does that do to the rest of the ecosystem? If you take away the thing that is at the top, that's eating everything else, what does that do you think?
There's more of everything else.
More of everything else. So I'm a cattle rancher. I don't like the wolf. I shoot the wolf. Yay, the wolf's not eating my cows. Now all the deers start to explode in population. I've got deer everywhere. I walk outside and trip on deers because I've killed the wolf, right? I'm a cattle rancher. What's happening to my cows now that there's 5,000 deer?
They can stop.
the deer are all eating my grass, and now my cows don't get to eat the grass. So I was wrestling with 2 wolves that would take down 3 or 4 cows a year. I got that wolf! Now my 500 cows are all starving to death because there's too many deer. So it's an interesting thing. We get into this problem when we start focusing on killing something, because that's a problem. Now everything else gets jacked up. And then the last level of consumer is the thing that eats everything once it's dead. These are the scavengers and the decomposers. And the word here is the tritivore. This is trash eater. And so these guys are initially things like condors or buzzards that eat the meat off of a dead animal. And then there's things like flies and beetles that lay their eggs, and the maggots eat what's left on the bones. And then there's things like funguses and bacteria that digest the bones, right? If you leave a carcass out in the wild and it doesn't get cleaned up or mowed over or buried, that carcass actually feeds lots of things for a good long time. There's whole people who make their entire career studying what's called whale fall. A whale dies, a whale sinks, dead carcass of a whale, lays on the bottom of the ocean for 7, 8, 9 years, while lots of things eat the dead whale. It's incredible to watch all that happen. So energy rises through a food pyramid. Consumers, herbivores, predators, and the top predators. Energy flows up as everything eats what's underneath it. This is called a food chain or a food pyramid. More often than not, the more accurate answer is that these things are webs, right? So the sun provides the energy, and everything eats something else, and then the decomposers eat it all as things die. But the more complicated you get, the more close to reality that you are. So there isn't just one kind of plant. There's actually lots of kinds of plants, and there's not just one thing that eats the plants. There's lots of things that eat the plants. And there's not just one thing that eats other things that eat the plants. There's lots of things that eat the things that eat the plants. And sometimes there's not just one pinnacle predator. Sometimes there might be 2. One with wings and one with fur is usually the answer. So sometimes these things are really, really complicated. Here's the last slide of notes for you. Matter and ecology, studying stuff as it moves. Elements, which are necessary for life, cycle through the environment. And you can make your career studying one of these and how the stuff moves, how physical objects like nitrogen or phosphorus or something like that move through an ecosystem. There's careers to be made in that study as well. So these are ecosystem ecologists looking at biotic and abiotic things as they move through an area. You could track nitrogen, and you could say, hey, look, most of what you breathe is nitrogen. There's nitrogen in the air. It goes into your lungs, and it comes out of your lungs. And is that all that happens to it? Well, no, because actually, some of it actually does get captured by living things, mostly by plants, but also some by animals. And that nitrogen becomes a part of the body. And a lot of that is actually done by bacteria. The bacteria make the nitrogen compounds that plants and animals need, and they absorb through their food. And then now there's nitrogen in your body. Amino acids, all the proteins that make you up. DNA has lots of nitrogen in it. All of the nitrogen in you used to be air. How did it get from air to your meat? And then now you die. What happens to your meat and all the nitrogen locked up in it? Where does that go? How does that get back into the atmosphere? Nitrogen cycle is amazing. You can do the same thing with hydrogeologic cycle. We live in a great place to study that. There's a volcano that's making islands and making them bigger. And as you look up the Hawaiian island chain, every island is a little bit smaller. And the reason is not because the volcano is making a bigger island now and he's more serious about it. It's because as the islands move off the hot spot, they start to shrink from erosion because rain and waves and us watering things runs the island into the ocean. That's why Kauai is the smallest of the major inhabited islands, and the Big Island is the big island because it's still being made, right? And islands get smaller as they wear down over time. That's part of the hydrogeologic cycle. What happens to water and dirt as things get cycled through the environment? The oxygen carbon dioxide cycle. You are breathing in oxygen and breathing out carbon dioxide. What happens there, and where does it go? And Is it only the classroom picture of a plant and a pig, and they make what the other thing needs? Or is it more complicated than that? It's more complicated than that. Phosphorus cycle. This is really, really cool. It involves all kinds of like lightning and volcanoes, and it's amazing to study how phosphorus moves through the ecosystem. The carbon cycle. Sugar gets eaten and digested, and actually a lot of what you take in your mouth via food actually leaves your body when you go, oh. That's weird to think about. I'm going to have a donut, and tomorrow I'm going to go, oh, and the donut comes out my mouth. What? Yes. Carbon comes in your body through food, and some of it leaves your body through, excretory products that you're used to and deal with a couple times a day. But a lot of the carbon that used to be your food comes out when you breathe out. And that's kind of strange to think about. So you can study how matter moves through living things and through the ecosystem. Then there's this last idea called a limiting factor. And a limiting factor exists when populations run out of a needed resource and cannot grow past that point. So let's say we've got a population of fish in a pond. And the fish, what do the fish eat? We'll make it a pretty simple pond. The fish are algae eaters. They are like, we'll call them carp. Let's make it a pond of carp, just for fun. And the carp lay eggs and make more babies and have more baby fish. But the carp population can only grow to the point where all of the babies are getting enough algae to grow up. And it's a sad story, but sometimes a carp has babies. The babies don't get enough algae. The babies starve to death. And that's a sad story. And so the carp population, while they continue to have babies, doesn't get any bigger because the babies starve to death. And the babies are only replaced and successfully become adults when some of the adults die of whatever, and now some of the babies can eat the algae that they were eating. And now the population can replace the ones that died, but the population itself doesn't get any bigger. So you have mortality balancing infancy, and the population stays at one size. Now what happens if all of a sudden, here's this pond, and the pond has as many carp as it can possibly have, and then somebody walks by and throws some fertilizer in the pond. Don't know why. Maybe it was runoff off of a field or something like that. And all of a sudden the algae is like, fertilizer? Heck yeah! And the algae blows up, and there's algae now everywhere. What happens to the carp population? It grows because now the babies have more food. Ah, good. So now the algae population has exploded, the carp population has exploded, but what's interesting is when these things happen, quite frequently the algae population can't stay at that level because there's something else that they need that they won't get enough of long term. So now the algae population dies back, partly because it ran out of whatever fertilizer ran in there, partly because there's more carp eating them. Algae population shrinks. What happens to the carp population? They shrink back down too. So there are these things called limiting factors. And there's something out there that is keeping our population the size that it is. And we can't get any bigger because of that thing out there. If that thing out there changes, then we can get bigger or we can get smaller. But not until that thing out there changes. That's the limiting factor. There are two kinds of limiting factors. There are density-dependent limiting factors, and these are things that become more or less limiting as the population grows. So these are things that can respond to population size, like food availability. If I only have 10 carp and I've got a 5-acre pond, well, that algae is just plentiful. But as the carp population grows, the algae starts to shrink because more carp are eating it. So the food supply responds to the population size. That's a density-dependent limiting factor. The bigger my population grows, the more this thing squeezes back down on population size. Okay? The other one is a density-independent limiting factor, and these things limit the size of the population regardless of how big it is. In our algae-filled carp pond, the actual size of the pond and the amount of water in the pond doesn't change. We're going to pretend that there's no evaporation or inflow, just for now. The pond is as big as it is. And it's going to limit the amount of fish I can have just by pure volume. Because at some point, there's nothing but carp in the pond, and they're all like, I can't move. I can't move from you either. There's nothing but fish. Okay? The size of the pond is not elastic. It doesn't stretch, right? So that's a density-independent limiting factor. There are other things like that too. Just a few fish, the pond is as big as it is. Tons of fish, the pond is as big as it is, okay? Density-independent limiting factors, density-dependent limiting factors. Last vocabulary term is carrying capacity. So this is a number of things that can live there, and that number is controlled by density-dependent and density-independent limiting factors that squeeze down on a population. So you can't have more carp than however many carp you can have in that pond because of the size of the pond, the amount of water, the amount of food. And those things limit how many carp can live in that pond, and that would be the carrying capacity. Another thing we'll talk about in the next couple of days is human population size versus the Earth. Okay? Do humans have a carrying capacity on the planet? Is the planet full of people? Or can we have more people? It's just another thing to think about. Is it responsible for you to have babies? Or is it not? That's what you think about, right? As you live your life. So, carrying capacity is the absolute number of living things that can be there. Any questions? Okay, so this should have been lecture number